Before we get to King Charles III, the priest king, is he the Antichrist? Who knows? But important month of May when it comes to the exit out of the World Health Organization. There's an organization called Sovereignty Coalition, the American Sovereignty Declaration, and their hashtag is Exit the WHO, Exit the WHO. As you know, the WHO is, United Nations agency, effectively controlled by the Chinese Communist Party.
The WHO is the organization?
The WHO, yeah.
Sounds like an abacus sell over
Yes,
to
yeah.
Who is the organization?
Well,
that's right.
Moreover, underwritten and influenced by other special interests, including Bill Gates and Big Pharma. So there's an organization wanting to raise awareness in the month of May to exit the World Health Organization. We'll move on from this, but John Haller, your thoughts?
Listen, you could follow Center for Security Policies. Frank Gaffney's group has done a lot of work on that. Michelle Bachmann.
Say that again?
Also, Michelle Bachmann.
No, I mean
in the Center for Security Policy.
Center for Security Policy.
Frank Gaffney's group
Okay.
has done a lot of work on that. And they're, there's a lot of people say, oh, they're not going to do this, they're not going to do this. Listen, if they're saying they're not going to do it, then you got to decide who's spouting misinformation. We just went through a lot of time, and now the narrative is like, well, we never shut anything down. What are you talking about? That was just everybody was volunteering to do that. I mean, that's sort of what Trudeau has set up in Canada. He's not very popular in Alberta, although they have a lunatic mayor in Calgary that persecutes Christian pastors, and their prime minister, or whatever they call him in their province, is not that great either. So Trudeau's not liked in Alberta by and large, though. So listen. By the way, as they push this energy thing on us, now all of a sudden they're saying, well, maybe nuclear energy isn't so bad. We can handle the waste. And now who's got a new, not a water-cooled, but a sodium-cooled nuclear reactor that's under construction in Kimmerer, Wyoming, southwestern Wyoming. It's a company that's owned by Bill Gates.
My goodness. What
It's
a web,
supposed
huh?
to open in 2030. So that date keeps coming up everywhere. Agenda 2030, the World Economic Forum. Somebody put out a video called Ukraine 2030, how they want to turn it into this digital cashless society. So watch the date 2030. I did a talk on Calgary about that. There's a theory that would suggest maybe the second coming around 2030 to 2032. But I don't want to be accused of date setting, because if it comes and goes, I won't be surprised. But I'm just saying there seems to be some impotence based on the prophecy in Joel of for 2 days we'll be oppressed, and on the third day he will rise us up. We'll call for him to return. And that's a prophecy of what happens at the end of this period of tribulation.
Well,
so let's jump over to this article on this inscription that was found, an early Hebrew inscription that likely dates to the Bronze Age. It predates any previously known inscription in Israel by at least 200 years, found on Mount Ebal. And it said, "You are cursed by God." What is that all about, John Haller?
Yeah, so listen, I'm going to make a recommendation that I do a lot. I would recommend Joel Kramer and his book, Where God Came Down, is an excellent resource to kind of give you a primer on archaeology. But he also has a YouTube channel where he puts up, unlike me, puts up kind of short videos on one specific topic. It's very, very popular, far more popular than my YouTube channel, called Expedition Bible. Joel and Pam and I were just three of us traveling around Judea and Samaria for a few days back in 2017. It was like a PhD education on archaeology. So one of the places we went was to Nablus, which is one of the worst terrorist cities in Israel. As you drive down the street, every square is honoring a martyr that went and bombed and killed Jews.
Wow.
But then right in the midst of it, there's this giant refugee camp that's still a refugee camp since 1948. Been there for 75 years now, called Balata. But right next to Balata, and when we were there, we were on Friday mornings, so you could hear the mosque messages being broadcast by loudspeaker all over town. And I don't speak Arabic, but I'm pretty sure they weren't talking peace and love.
Right.
Because there was a killing near Nablus by a Jewish settler who had killed a couple Palestinian Arabs. They attacked his car. Well, they just attacked his car with some rocks. No, these rocks are like, 20-pound stones, and there were like 300 people attacking this car, so he shot and killed 2 of them. And they had riots in the streets. So we went to Shechem. This is the ancient biblical city. You can sit there. You can look at, in Judges, it talks about the temple fortress. You can stand within the outline of that. You can see the thick walls. And at the end of it, though, this is where Joshua built a holy place when the people came in, and he put up a stone as a memorial as to the covenant that had been renewed there at Shechem on Mount Ebal, where they found this document, and Mount Gerizim, where the Samaritans live. So very interesting archaeology, geography. You can go and touch what's left of the stone that Joshua put up.
Wow.
You can touch it. It's now got Palestinian graffiti on it that they got to clean off every now and again. But you can stand there, and you stand there, but you look up, and to your right would be Mount Ebal, which is sort of barren. It's dry. Mount Gerizim is green and lush. So Joshua divided the people of Israel into 6 tribes on Ebal, 6 tribes on Gerizim. You can read about it in the book of Joshua. And they were renewing the covenant. And so on Ebal, they shouted the curses that were given to them by Moses. If we do this, God will send judgment. And then on Gerizim, they pronounced the blessings if they kept the law and followed what God had told Moses. But on Ebal, they have discovered an altar, which I don't think there's any question now, is the altar that Joshua erected on Ebal. And it's interesting that he erected the altar where they would make sacrifices for their sins on the Mount of Curses. So last year, Scott Stripling, I believe is his name, Biblical Research Associates, they have a great YouTube channel. They announced that they had found this in a sifting project. Some guy, they come in and they dig all this stuff up and they throw the debris over in a pile. They went and looked at the debris in a wet sifting project, and they came up with this lead tablet. And they've analyzed it now. It was just in the Jerusalem Post last night. It was released. I don't know if it's in the published paper today. I didn't see it. But it talks about, it uses the term Yahweh.
YHW.
YHW, Yahweh. And so there, and this is very early pre-Hebrew script. And it shows that they were there in the land. And it talks about the curses. Now, one guy said, well, this is just really what happens if I don't listen to my wife. The guy was just writing down all the problems that he would have. But it's very interesting. They had to do this analyze because they couldn't pull it apart. And it's right there. So they had come into the land. They had done the conquest. By the way, you can go to the British Museum, get a book called The Bible in the British Museum. And in the British Museum, you will see these little letters. They're stone letters, cuneiform. And they're called the Armana letters. And I saw them. I stood right there an inch away. And I don't read cuneiform. They've been translated. But it was from the king of Shechem to the Pharaoh in Egypt saying, listen, we're having trouble. We're being overrun by these Haparu people here in Canaan. Help us. Haparu, Hebrew. That's right.
Interesting.
Wow.
And the dating on this, I mean, is this significantly earlier than they expected?
Yes.
Does it change? I mean, does it change anything?
It falls within, I believe, the period of the conquest is known as the Late Bronze period. Okay. There's a big narrative. I was just watching a video that Joel put up about Jericho. The narrative on Jericho changed. I took biblical archaeology almost 50 years ago when I was in college. Great class by a guy who would spend his summers digging in Israel, assistant librarian at Grace College, Bob Eibach, and he said they're going to change the narrative on Jericho. So when we went to Israel in 1995, the narrative had changed to the extent that many evangelical tours don't even bother to go out on the Tell at Jericho. So when we were there with Joel, I watched. He knows the owner of the restaurant there. I think it's the Paradise Cafe. He's a very good friend of his. And the guy talked, and he's known locally as the king of Jericho. So he said, John, if you're Joel's friend, you're my friend. You need anything in Jericho, you come and see me. And I think he means it. I mean, he really means it. But so here's the restaurant. There's a parking lot. I must have watched over 200 tour buses come through there in the few hours we were there and then when we went out to the tell. There was one group of 12 people other than Joel, Pam, and I that went out on the tell. So here is this rich proof that this is the Jericho of the conquest and that evangelicals have been duped. That's shocking to me. That's stunning. And I went on a couple of trips to Israel. We never went to the tell at Jericho. Now I've been there, and now I would say, in fact, I'm going to try to organize a tour for next year so you can follow me at Fellowship Bible Chapel. I'll make announcements about that. I was going to try to do this year, but just not enough time. And what I'm going to try to do is we're going to try to break it into two, the regular tour and then sort of the deep dive tour for a smaller group. That's my goal and desire, because we completely ignore these great biblical sites in Judea and Samaria, Hebron, Jericho, Shechem, Shiloh. Not a lot of groups will go to Shiloh because it's more accessible. Shechem is not. It's hard to get in there. You got to get a special bulletproof window bus. You have to have a security guard. So there's some risk to it. But I mean, we drove around in Joel's beat up car. His car was dirty enough that I asked him, Joel, I said, don't take this the wrong way, but do they have car washes in Israel? And he said, yeah, I don't wash my car because if I do, it's going to get stolen. So the dirtier it is, the less likely it is to get stolen. So anyway, listen, I would just highly recommend you go to Expedition Bible. There's also another channel, Israel My Channel, on YouTube. The guy puts up reconstruction graphics of ancient Jerusalem and Jerusalem of the Second Temple period. He's a Polish guy associated with Friends of Israel. I cannot remember his name. Chris Atalka, who spoke at the Calgary conference also. I met him at he was at the Media Summit in December, so I met him down in the city of David. I talked to him that day. Phenomenal channel. Yep. I mean, there's so much evidence out there that it's overwhelming, and more continues to come.
Yeah.
Always.
Like this tablet. So go to the Jerusalem Post today and read this book.
Well, my husband and I always say, wherever you put a shovel in Israel, you will find something. How can you not? And I think, in another life, my dream job would have been archaeology in Israel. That would have been the absolute ultimate incredible job.
We did
Some
a podcast
estimates are
when
that
you
they
got back
only
from
have
Israel. We did a
about
podcast on that.
1 to 5% of it has been.
Are you kidding?
1 to 5%.
Wow.
And you can go to Hebron. When I was there at the Media Summit, I talk about this a lot because it meant a lot to me. I love Hebron. Hebron is the tomb, the cave of Machpelah. Herod built a commemorative structure there that has stood for 2,000 years through earthquakes and everything. I was able to be introduced to a guy named Yishai Fleischer and his wife Malka, and he's the official spokesperson for the Jewish community of Hebron. You might not have him on your show. He's a rabbi. He's a Zionist. And I got invited to their house for Shabbat. It was an incredible evening as I saw their children engaged with the text of Scripture, unlike any evangelical child I have ever met in my life.
Wow. And
they argue about it. Like, well, I think the rabbi said that so-and-so didn't do the wrong thing when they were selling Joseph into slavery. This one brother didn't really act that bad. And I think the rabbi, he doesn't understand this is really bad. It was just a kind of an interesting engagement. But so there at this cave, you can go to the place. It's built above the cave where Abraham, Sarah, Rebecca, Isaac, Jacob, and Leah are buried. It's actually there. And then you can drive a couple miles up into Hebron where the Jews aren't allowed to go and go to a place called Mamre, which is where Abraham got the promise. 3 angels came to him, and it says Yahweh met Abram by the oaks of Mamre. You can see where the oak trees grew in the bedrock, out of the bedrock, where it's broken up. You can walk there today. And it's interesting, 2 of those angels left after they had the meeting with Abram in Genesis 18, and they went to a place called Sodom. But the other angel just sort of went away. And so who was the third angel? I think it was the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ.
Interesting.
But you can learn a lot about that in Joel's book.
All right, John, 10 minutes left, and we've got to talk about this article, fascinating article of the Wall Street Journal on Charles III, the priest king. And it starts off by saying a global audience watched the coronation of King Charles III last week, but no one could see the most important part. Behind a hand-woven screen in Westminster Abbey, Justin Welby, Archbishop of Canterbury, took up the oldest item in the coronation regalia, a golden spoon, and anointed the king's hands, chest, and head with holy oil. So they anointed Charles III.
I talked a little bit about this in my update yesterday, and I actually was able to dig out the video of part of the coronation proceeding where they talked about this and the priest-king aspect of this. So, look, there's this theory that Charles is the Antichrist. You know, like I said, I put it in my I have a Charles III basket now. And, you know, so I look at it. And listen, when you look at what went on with the British Commonwealth Games in Birmingham earlier this year, the imagery, the beast, the 70 nations, the Tower of Babel, that was all part of that as Charles drove up there to attend that in his electric car. And then in 2021, you had the quote, rather famous now in prophecy circles, of Charles saying that we need to mount a military-style campaign on energy and green agenda. And it says, and then he mentions like with trillions at his disposal. And it's like, who is he talking about? Far beyond global GDP.
Wow.
And it's like, you know, did he misspeak or what? But I've listened to the audio 100 times at least. Some say, well, with trillions at its disposal. I don't think that's what he said. And so was he tipping something off? Was he tipping off something about himself or somebody else that he's meeting with? I don't know. But if you look, so this oil came from Israel, and the article in the Wall Street Journal, this is on Friday, May 12th, this demonstrates the deep historic link between the coronation, the Bible, and the Holy Land. Why are they bringing this up? Charles went there. Mm-hmm. There's never been a monarch make an official visit. By the way, this oil came from olive trees on the Mount of Olives, which is where Charles' maternal grandmother is buried. The mother of Prince Philip.
Interesting.
Philip went there in 94. Prince Harry has gone there. Made the first, I think, royal family official visit back a few years ago. But it says here, so Archbishop Welty's explained, without mentioning Jews, Israel or British governors' refusal to recognize Israel's sovereignty on the Mount of Olives, the world's oldest, largest, and most sacred Jewish cemetery. So, like, why did Welby say that? Why did this come up?
Yeah.
So, look, maybe there's a connection. It's certain. Listen, we see all these things where people are acting in, I guess, messianic ways. There's, I think, a push by the king of the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, who's building this massive city in the desert that will be he wants it to be the center of world commerce, Neom. He's also made a proposal through channels. It appeared in the Wall Street Journal, appeared in Arab papers, about a proposal to reach peace between Israel and the Arabs called the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, which it would be a true two-state solution. It would be Jordan and areas of the West Bank and Gaza in one thing, not the four-state solution that the morons at our State Department talk about, where it's Jordan, Palestine, and Gaza, and maybe another one. It's just very interesting that all of this is converging at this time. And then at the media summit, I almost fell off my chair when I heard this. Jonathan Medved, a very wealthy Israeli businessman promoter, said that he brought up ChatGPT 4, which is the first I'd heard of it. It just rolled out about 10 days before, already over 1 million downloads. Now it's way over. It's in the hundreds of millions. AI is changing our world, and it has a religious aspect to it. And he said, we're going to use AI in when we do this, we will make the lame walk. Well, that ties very closely to the messianic signs that Jesus told the disciples of John the Baptist when they came and said, "Are you the one?" He says, "Yeah, you go tell John what you're seeing. And he did it. He said, "The lame walk, the blind see, the lame walk, deaf hear." Neuralink presentation ties in the same thing.
Wow.
So what you see is the beginning of people for these messianic sort of miracle properties of things coming with AI.
This article says, anointing affirmed Charles as a link in a symbolic chain between heaven and earth. The Hebrew Mashiach, anointed, gives us Messiah. The Greek charisma, anointing, became Christos, anointed one. Although Charles swore to serve his people, and anointed monarch's first duty is to God. And we had also on the podcast last week about they were going to offer an opportunity for people around the world watching to swear an oath to him and his ancestors forever, which added another weird mystical element. And we live in such a secular world, and yet, people are spiritual beings, and they are gravitating towards this combination of church and state. Do you have any thoughts on that?
She reigned for a long time, the second longest reigning monarch in modern human history that could be confirmed, Queen Elizabeth. And I wonder if these things were said at Queen Elizabeth's coronation back in 1952. That would be interesting research project.
Yeah,
well, so
his
you
was
can email that to
his was
David.
more ecumenical than any. His was most ecumenical that in history. They're saying. I mean, I did some reading on it, but it's pretty interesting.
Well, there's some people who think that he's already converted to Islam.
Wow.
That because of some of the things that he said, he's certainly ecumenical at a minimum. I don't view him particularly as a God-fearing man.
Yeah.
But then why did they do this? Why?
Exactly.
He allowed this to happen at this particular time of history. So I'm sure the people who believe that he is the one, their heads are exploding after they read this article and watch that ceremony, because there were a lot of things there that are really kind of weird.
Yeah.
We've got just 2.5 minutes with John Haller, and we wanted to just touch on this story over at Rutherford Institute. There's attempts by the courts to silence individuals whose religious views may be perceived as intolerant or hateful. So there's a 5-year restraining order against a street preacher in Oklahoma, and he's been threatened with arrest after citing Bible verses on social media, pay attention, friends, to express moral concerns about a church that endorses same-sex marriage and raising awareness about a public drag queen performance that occurred in front of children. Most of the people listening right now would say, yes, we need to speak up about that, but
it's unconstitutional.
Yeah.
I mean, it's clearly unconstitutional. The judge should be removed. The Oklahoma legislature should get on board, get their act together, and impeach this guy and get him out of office immediately, or the Oklahoma governor. So step up and do something, because this is outrageous.
Yes,
we're going to see more of this. They've weaponized this whole thing. In Calgary, there's a local pastor that I talked to some of the people about. He had gone down to the local library to protest Drag Queen Story Hour.
Yep.
They took him and they threw him out of the window. Sort of reminded me of a scene in, I hate to say I watched it, Beverly Hills Cop, where they threw Eddie Murphy out of a window.
And he was arrested.
And he was arrested for littering or something. Or
loitering.
Loitering. Well, they threw me out of the window. And the same thing happened there. And so, I mean, this guy's been in and out of jail. There's another guy who's doing a sort of the Kirk Cameron type thing, Truth Story Hour at the library.
Yeah.
But the librarians in Calgary are fighting him and refusing to allow him to hold a Truth Story Hour at the thing. So there's a whole agenda here.
Yes.
This agenda ties into a lot of things, transhumanism and all sorts of things.
It's fascinating. We didn't even get to that. The NIH, we mentioned yesterday, they're doing experiments on transgendered kids, and because of the hormones, and two have died. And anyway,
or Yuval Harari's article in The Economist last week, where he says AI will eventually create a religion for people.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that next week, Mary and I, because that's an extensive article. But John, it's always great to have you in studio. What a blessing!
Fastest hour of my life.
Yeah. Have a safe trip back to Ohio.
Thank
you so much for you and Pam, and what a blessing she's been to Rosanna. We appreciate you. Mary, we got a lot to talk about next week yet. There's only a fraction of what we could really get to today. But tomorrow, friends, you will hear, Crash Connell tells me he guarantees you will hear T.A. McMahon and a conversation we had a few months ago, Mary and I, with T.A. McMahon tomorrow on the podcast. Also, of course, he's with the Berean Call. Also, Jelaine Appling, Wisconsin Family Council, give us an update on whatever happened to that firebombing of her office back in May of last year, Mother's Day last year, 2022. And we'll talk about relevant issues in Wisconsin and politics with Jelaine. Pete Garcia on Friday talking about a new book, him and Terry James, New World Order. That's the topic. We're going to dive into that with Pete. We appreciate you guys again, as always, your prayers. Everybody goes through warfare. If you are a child of Christ, a child of God, and you are a believer in Christ and truth proclaimer, you will get warfare. But, we get hit as well. So we thank you for your prayers and for sharing the podcast. Well, John Haller, David Fiorazo, and for Mary Danielsen, God bless you.
And as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter.